Hello, welcome in, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm really excited to have this stream today. We have planned this now for, I don't know, maybe a month or so ish. Things have come up, okay? Mondays are just apparently not the day. If you are new here, hi, hello, welcome. My name is Jasmine. I'm a practicing witch and I talk about it here on the internet. And today I have a super special guest. I will let you introduce yourself if you guys don't already know.
Hi everyone, I'm Marshall, Witch of Southern Light, or I go just by Marshall WSL sometimes. I am a queer Texas-based witch. I have written 2 books. The first one we actually did a whole discussion on as well, Cunning Words, A Grimoire of Tales and Magic. And now I'm excited to talk about my new book, came out last year in October, The Red Mother. I have to show, I love showing it off. This is the glossy hardcover color
I have
edition.
the paperback.
Oh, that red looks so crimson. I love it. And I have to
Yes.
say, thank you so much for your review. I watched it like tickled scarlet the whole time. It was just such a beautiful, enriched discussion and dissection of my words and my art. It truly moved me. So I'm so grateful to get to talk about it with you.
Oh, thank you. I'm getting ready to film another video of like my top 10, even though it's actually like 16 books I have. I'm doing a top 10 list of
Which
like books I recommend to like trad witches. And both of your books are on that list.
oh, thank you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I love your work. Um, I've loved your content even before I got into your work. But when I read Cunning Words and then taking into like the Red Mother, just it's a delight. Absolutely. And I tell like witches in my local sphere, but also like I can't shut the hell up on the internet. So I tell other witches online too, like I really enjoy this sort of like fresh perspective that I feel like you bring to traditional witchcraft. But let's get into talking about the Red Mother before I go on like a tangent, because she did just have a cute little edible. So we are limited.
Perfect. Let's go.
I want to start first with just introduce this book
Yeah.
in your own words. For those that might not be familiar with the Red Mother, if you would introduce it and also talk about cunning words as well.
Absolutely. The Red Mother was inspired by this concept called Old Mother Redcap. I first discovered it in the book The Black Toad by Gemma Gary, who, mother. She's
Yes.
mothering. It was a concept about like a charmer, an alewife, a local cunning woman in mostly like England and especially in Western England. And she she wrote this book and she wrote a chapter that was predominantly surrounding, charms, enchantments, written spells, things you could carry, things you could make. And I was just so moved by this. I wanted to learn the history of Old Mother Redcap, this name, where it came from. And I got to actually have the pleasure of interviewing her on my podcast, Southern Bramble. And I learned a little bit more about her history. And
Iconic, by the way. If you guys are not familiar with the podcast,
oh,
please go check it out.
thank you. Streaming on most platforms. Um,
Yes.
uh, I was so moved by it. I ended up writing a story called Our Mother in Red in the first book, Cunning Words, that was about it was the story of a trans woman discovering her transness, and the Red Mother, or Belinda, pops up in her moment of need and kind of helps facilitate her in that self-acceptance and transformation. And then throughout the first book, she kind of just popped up here and there. And when I finished, I immediately was like, this is not all of her story. What is her story? I'm yearning for her story. And I immediately just jumped into writing The Red Mother, which goes into who she is, where did she come from, and ultimately she represents that Lorik witch of the woods. She represents that storybook witch who is there in the cave in the darkness of the woods, and more importantly, finding your journey into your power, her finding her journey into her power, and You see the circumstances in the opening story that put her in the place to where she turns to witchcraft. And then all the steps she takes along the way as she learns her magic, as she experiments with her craft, as she expands and finds out what her limits are, because she's unlimited. And we
Yes.
are honestly unlimited by only the limits we put on ourselves. And I feel like this was a great exploration into that, into conjuration, into written charms, into working with our queer ancestors.
Yes.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a question that I did not put on my original list of questions that I thought of while I was getting ready today.
Hmm.
So in Cunning Words, we're introduced to like the mother in red, the mother in green, the mother in black.
Hmm.
So why the mother in red first? Which I'm super excited about personally. Like as the girl, like love to see the mother in red.
Hmm.
And my original review, like I talked about how the mother in red really touched me and moved me. But I'm just curious, like why we started with her first.
Hmm. I mean, that's actually exactly the reason she touched me and moved me. There was something about her story, and I myself fall in the line of conjurations, charms, and enchantments, especially written spells. I love sigils. These are things that are so ingrained into my craft. Red thread, burning seals of conjuration. Like this is my magic. And I felt so close to her. I felt like there was a part of her in me already that was so infectious.
Mhm.
I was affected by her story. And it felt like I really had no choice but to immediately dive deeper into that. Um,
Would you say that you feel closer to the mother in red than the others? Or, I mean, I'm sure the relationship is different, of course, but like,
Yeah, the relationships with all of them are different, but I do feel closer to her. Um, I do think that there's definitely queerness within all three of the mothers, the green and the black and the red. But there was something about her story that just felt very personal. Um,
mhm,
I myself, well, I identify as he, him. I myself am very gender fluid with my expression, and I remember having experiences that actually inspired the story of Ileana in the first book. Myself, I remember I remember sneaking into my mom's closet when she was out and twirling in dresses. Like I remember trying to experiment with who I was, how I wanted to express, and I remember the shame of it. I remember the secrecy of it, and I remember just wishing, God, if there was a fairy godmother who could just grant me my wishes. And that was a very big inspiration for our Mother in Red story. So it felt like not only was it nostalgic, but it felt like it was already something that was part of my spirit. And there was just something within that made me feel like I am swimming in this red mother pool. She is this mentor, this being, this witchy godmother I always wanted. And she presented herself to me in that way. And when you read the book, sometimes she's the helper and sometimes she is the cursor. Like she is
same,
her, yeah, I know, right? So
same.
and that's what resonates so deeply, I think, with her story. I think witches and practitioners who read this will find themselves in her journey in many different places. Um, there's a great story in there about sex work, and
Mhm.
the witch and the madam. I myself in my 20s worked as a stripper. I had several different instances where I took on clients.
Yeah.
I am myself a hairstylist, and that's also what she did part time while she was working in the brothel. And so there are
It
so many.
totally goes so hand in hand.
Yeah,
Like,
there are a
as
lot of
someone
parts of
who's
myself.
worked that,
Hmm.
you know, Google me. As someone who also is a barber and as someone who's a witch, I feel like these, like, they go hand in hand
They
for
do,
sure. I would
absolutely.
like to know, so from your first book to your second book, like, were there other mysteries that were kind of like revealed to you through really focusing more on the Red Mother from the first book? And even since this book has been out, like, what can you illuminate for us now that it's been out since it came out in October, right?
1st of October in
Yeah.
2024.
So it's been out
Um,
now for 5 months. I
yeah.
don't know. I can't do the math. I'm a beautician, not a mathematician.
I'm not a math
Um,
gay. That's what me and Austin always say. I'm not a math gay.
hello. But
Um,
yeah.
the
So
absolute
like, yeah.
writing it itself, there were many mysteries revealed. So in the very first book, Cunning Words, there's an opening chapter called Spirit Contracts. And in the opening chapter in The Red Mother is Spirit Contracts Part 2. And in the first book, you read of a simple story of meeting of a lady in a hooded cloak who meets the man at the crossroads, makes 3
Mhm.
offerings, and asks for a boon, and it ends with, "And deliver it they did." And in the second book, when I wrote that, I didn't know that that was actually going to be the Red Mother's initiation. So when
Mhm.
I started it, it was very clear to me that, oh, I've already read her initiation. I just haven't written her full story yet. And that was actually one of the biggest impetuses to this book, to the opening of it, was I want you to realize you've already read her initiation. You just didn't know it was her. And now you know why she had to meet a man at the crossroads. Now you know what she asked for. It was her sovereignty. And
Yeah.
much, much more
In
came out.
that very first chapter, um, with her father, her stepfather, and
With her
she's like,
father and a man that she was being forced to marry, who was the sheriff of the town, who
yes.
basically it was about a vulnerable person being foisted upon someone who was uh, not a good person in the first place, which is honestly a huge uh, image of a imbalanced power structure and why she would seek out her own power when she
Yeah.
needed to.
Well, the very beginning really drew me in because I feel like the very introduction kind of like touches on themes of transgression and subversion and also like a little bit maybe of like perversion
Hmm.
and like subverting what popular society thinks of perversion.
There's some
Um,
taboo things in here.
and like I feel like that is so the Red Mother that I feel like I have connected to
Mhm.
is she feels almost very like Babylon coded to me. She feels very like sacred horror coded to me. She feels
100%.
very like breaker of chains, liberator of the oppressed, um, the girl,
Yeah.
capital THE.
And you know, there's a story in here called The Pilgrimage, where she leaves her cave and she travels the entire landscape and she goes to all these temples. But you also get a small little section where she gets to meet Una and the grandmother. She
Mhm.
also gets to meet the Green Mother. She also goes into the woods and you see she is the one that awakens Oliviana, the Black Mother. Like, you don't realize that in the first story, when you read about Oliviana and you read about Our Mother in Black, she goes through this massive transformation after she's brought back from the brink of death, somewhere between life and death. You know that she awakens with a scream, and then now she's this transformed, dark being. But now you also know it was the Red Mother who awoke her.
Mhm.
And so these things all started to come together as I was writing, and I didn't write them in any specific order. I wrote them as they came to me, sometimes all in one single sitting, sometimes over months at a time, because I really, really, really focused on waiting for the story to come to me, not trying to force anything. And I think that was really helpful in getting these words out in the way in which they have now presented themselves.
So since the book has been out,
Mhm.
any changes in your gnosis?
Yes, the red inscriptions, which you talked about beautifully in the review, which I was so grateful for. Um, the red inscriptions have taken on a larger life form than I think I anticipated when I first started.
Will you talk about what those red
Yeah,
inscriptions are for anyone who's watching this who might not know?
there's a story in here called Red Inscriptions, and then in the back there's it's the tale, and then there's the art, which is in the grimoire section. And the story tells about the Red Mother who happens to be just enjoying a nice glass of wine in a bar, and she overhears the tale of the executioner killing his celebrating his execution of the 100th witch that they have hung. And she decides to go about herself to go to the gallows hill and conjure up the spirits of all of these oppressed people. these people who have been executed, these people who have been maligned and pointed fingers and accused of witchcraft, whether they were or were not. And that was very much inspired by our queer ancestors whose lives are lost, very inspired by marginalized people who were struck down at their most vulnerable moment, who didn't get the opportunity to live out their full lives. And she called them up and invited them into her book to participate in her magic. And they land in her book in the shape of symbols creating a new alphabet. And the whole point was to call upon our queer, our witch, our marginalized ancestors, to invite them into our craft and use this alphabet to write spells, to write petitions, to write charms and enchantments. That was the whole point. And I did lay out a very specific way in which to draw a line and draw these on there, and then to put it in a book and, to stamp it with the blood as an offering. But I've actually expanded a little bit more into not just keeping it solely in a book, but more so carrying them in talismans, carrying them in amulets, writing them out in petitions.
Mm-hmm.
I've got them tattooed on my arms.
I was about to ask you, like, have you tattooed any? Because, like, that's where my brain
Let me
goes.
see if I can show you. I have the square of the old ones here, and then I have the red inscriptions here of the old ones.
Oh, yes.
And then I have my sigil of the Red Mother here, and then I have this says sovereignty in Theban. But I'm working on some more of those, and that has expanded away from the rigid way in which I initially set it up.
Well, it takes on a life of itself.
It does.
Like you put the work out there, and other witches start weaving with the work that you've put out there, and it kind of weaves into its own sort of like sentient thing. I mean, I think that both of your books kind of have a spirit in of themselves that is like, it's its own entity.
I mean, it's on the cover. The entity is living, it's being. Like, the whole reason I created these sigils and why I worked in a way, I mean, like, there were several different versions that I'm like, that's not right. That's not right. This isn't right. Until it really felt like this is the right one. This is the one I'm being told is the right one. And the reason that they're throughout the whole book, the reason that they're in the backgrounds of these pages, the reason that they exist all throughout is because that spirit is so present throughout the book. It's making itself known. It's working its way into your psyche. The reason you see these tendrils coming out is because those are the threads weaving its way into your craft.
Those red threads.
That's right.
So is there anything that did not make the cut into the book? Like, is all of it the original intention, or were there some things that you removed from the book for any reason?
Well, there was in this book, there was a story I actually originally wrote that was about the Red Mother meeting the Mother in Green. And as I was writing it, I was like, this isn't right. This almost feels like a side quest. This is like it's a lovely imagination of them coming together, but it didn't feel like it was giving me anything that was meant to be part of the stories. It existed in its own universe almost. And that was actually pretty much the only story that I fully wrote out that didn't make it into this book. But there was a story in Cunning Words that was a retelling of Genesis Adam and Eve story. Did I tell you this already?
I don't think so.
There was a story in there that was a reimagining of the Garden of Eden and the forbidden fruit. And I was actually inspired by a famous painting of Eve standing naked while Adam was eating her out. And it was just like forbidden fruit, my ass, right? Like, no, that was the painting was called. It was called Forbidden Fruit. And I rewrote a story where the serpent that came forward was not offering a tangible fruit, but the power of the orgasm, the joy. Is
there a place where we can read some of these stories that did not make the cut? Is there a blog?
I may have actually. I'd have to look back. I may have put that in my Patreon, but now that I've said this out loud and going on, if I haven't, I'm going to have to put it in my Patreon. It was. I sent it to a few people. I heard their feedback, and I felt like it didn't have the same place in Cunning Words as the rest of the stories did, but it was definitely its own reimagining of the ecstasy of orgasm and the innocence, not lost, but knowledge gained from realizing the pleasure that exists when you know something you didn't know before. So the orgasm itself, yes, gorgeous. Love to have one or two. But the whole point is not necessarily that it's about sex as much as it was about the ecstatic knowing, the ecstatic knowledge of something when your naivete is gone, when you realize what your body, what your mind, what your nerve endings can feel and experience. And that forbidden fruit was something she turned around and taught the man, and then they went off into the world to share.
Do you have any like pop culture references of your own that you would associate with the Red Mother? Like, be them real people, like celebrities, or like superheroes or like book characters. Like, if you were to draw parallels to the Red Mother and like other figures, who would
It,
you draw them to?
it's honestly, it's hard not to think of the Scarlet Witch sometimes that way. And honestly, my first actual real inspiration was Gemma Gary herself. She was the first person I thought of when I first started writing it. Yes, someone just said Lady Gaga's Abracadabra.
I was thinking
Abracadabra.
the same
Yes, when
thing.
she said the poem from the Lady in Red, I was just like, "Ooh,
Yeah, no. Can we please tread the mill to like this song
right."
specifically?
Okay,
I can't do it for the whole song, but just for the chorus, we can
I
tread,
want
and then for the rest of it, we could just kind of sway and do like some
way.
hand motions.
We can come up
Yes.
with it. We'll just take a small smidgen of the choreography and make it like part of our trance work.
Yeah. I feel
I
like
want
Gaga can embody the different mothers through like different.
absolutely. She knows exactly how she knows what she's doing. I want a slowed down version of that song to some haunting melodies with like there I know once a song comes out
There's
eventually
got to
new
be a
versions
version of
of
it
it
on
come
YouTube
out.
that's like reverbed or something.
I would love a reverb slowed down, like something I could play in the background while casting spells and ritual. I think that would be just crimson.
Absolutely. Just crimson. I love that. Um, okay. So are we going to see any more like work in the near future, like in the next 6 months to a year, that is like Red Mother coded?
You know, I
I
have
feel like you've
something.
told me about like work that you have planned.
Yes.
Um, are we going to see the Red Mother come up in some of that? Like we've seen the other mothers come up in the Red Mother?
I do have, as I've said before, this book is part of a Cunning Words collection. So there will be definitely at least long term two more books in this collection. Um, I'm I'm sure people know what they're going to be, but I'm just not going to say exactly yet. And my hope is that she will show up again, but I'm not quite sure at this very, very moment. I have something else that is totally separate from the Cunning Words collection that I've been working on for the past year and a half. I'm going through my second round of self-editing phase. I'm thinking about submitting it to a traditional publisher, possibly. Both of my books, Cunning Words and The Red Mother, are self-published. So this new one, I thought, now that this is separate from my collection, I might be interested in trying out traditional publishing, see how I like the experience. I'm more open to input from editors on this other endeavor, but I'm not open to input on the Cunning Words collection. That's mine. It is solely up to my discretion how I put it together, and I'm not trusting it with anyone else, down to literally the cover art to the stories that I'm going to be allowed to say. I've interviewed a lot of authors who have told me their heart was broken about things left on the cutting room floor, and I'm like, that can't happen with the Cunning Words
Yeah.
collection.
Yeah.
But there is something that's going to be coming out. I don't know if it's in the next 6 months. Like I said, I'm only in the second round of my personal editing phase before I submit it. But that is definitely on the horizon.
That's
And this
exciting.
will discuss the Red Mother. It will discuss aspects of me writing it as well. So that she will be very present in this next thing.
That's exciting.
It is exciting. I'm getting more excited about it as I'm going through the editing and rewrite phase.
Let's talk more about that magical alphabet and like the queer ancestors.
Mhm.
Recently, I've been reading Queer Rights by Enfi. I forget their last name.
Mhm.
Llewellyn sent me the book to review. And so if we could just talk about like queer ancestors,
Yeah.
let's go back to that. Because I thought that was a really beautiful part of the Red Mother. And as a queer person myself, I feel like it really moved me thinking about our mighty and our beloved dead from like a queer ancestor
Yeah.
lens.
Well, I live in the neighborhood of my city. My building was built in 1986 or 85. And so when I first moved here, there was an older gentleman who lived downstairs who we all got to know. Me and several friends live in this building. And he invited us in for cocktails one time. We were looking at this wall of pictures, and he said, I was just like, "What? You were a heartthrob, sir. Like, oh my goodness." And I was just so mesmerized with all of his friends. And he said, "Oh, that's David. He lived over at number such and such. He died in 1986, and that's so and so. We dated for about a year, but it didn't work out, blah, blah, blah. He passed away in 1988. And he went on and on and on until I realized he was pointing to these pictures of all these people who lived within under a mile radius of right where we are, whether it was in my building, across the street, down the road. And they all passed away during the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and 90s. And it made me start to realize the soil that I live in is soaked in the lives of people who didn't get to have their full lives. Queer people, gay people, whose lives were cut short due to a horrific epidemic that decimated us as a community. And I was watching as he was describing this, and you could see he had so many happy memories, but he also made it very clear he was the only one left. And um, it was a very special moment because it really opened up my eyes to the gravity of the space that I live in and the spirits who have existed here for decades. And I think about that a lot when I do my magic and ritual. I have a welcoming to the mighty dead when I do larger rituals that it's part of my grimoire. That's a personal one. And that was really a big inspiration for writing the red inscriptions because there are so many people, whether that be queer ancestors, whether that be witch ancestors, whether that be blood ancestors, whether that be chosen family ancestors, that go back for centuries,
Yeah.
who have been maligned or lives cut short, or they had so many dreams and hopes and places they wanted to see and things they wanted to do, and they never got to. And so my attention towards them became really, really important to me and inviting them into my magic, inviting them into my craft. And I wrote the red inscriptions as a way, as a story that was my dedication to them, an ode to them, an invitation for them to join me, for them to participate in life again, if they wanted.
Yeah. And we are living in the year of our Dark Lord, 2025,
Yeah.
which in the United States is a little bit scary. Like there's a lot going on. And I feel like what better time for the Red Mother to really be present with us in this moment as queer people,
Mhm.
especially, but also just as anyone who's marginalized or oppressed or 2025 is crazy. Like, it's been a hell of a fucking year, and it's
Yeah.
March 1st, you know?
And the only reason that you and I are able to sit here and have these conversations, the reason I'm able to publish this book, the reason that I'm able to live my life openly is because of those people. The people who died fighting during ACT UP, the people who marched on the streets to give us the rights that we're still fighting for this day. The only reason that I can publicly be here is because of them, and I always want to remember that. I want people to remember that. I want people to not forget what our surviving elder queer community went through. I
And not lose hope.
And not lose hope. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have great honor and respect for the survivors of our elder queer community. I didn't get to grow up with a lot of role models because they didn't get the chance to exist. So now I always want to remember them. I want to give them their sovereignty back in a way, however I can.
Beautiful. I want to talk about the twins and the Red Mother,
Yes.
because I really enjoyed that part of the book as well. I enjoyed the transgressive nature of the relationship that she had with
Hmm.
both of them in this sort of twin incestuous relationship.
Hmm.
Can we talk about that?
Yes. And for our listeners, okay, so just because I think it's so important, just to kind of like start where this comes from, there is an opening to this poem. It's an epic poem. I like to call my poems that tell a large story an epic poem. And um, it starts with when the Red Mother was 20 and 3, she took she took not one but two lovers. The men both knew and didn't care. In fact, they were twin brothers. Identical in every way, since birth, everything they shared, even their love for the same girl, their, their desire for her equally flared. And what was interesting is there's a part where it goes into um, why they felt so close to her, and it's a very small part, and it says they'd always been treated as a pair, as if they each weren't their own, but she saw them as individuals, same blood but different bone. And there's some twofold things there, but the whole point of the story is that this is very transgressive. This gets into a little bit of that perversion. This gets into that
Yeah.
place of embracing the taboo. And she loved
And
them
I
both.
think that you also, at the beginning of this book, give a little bit of like a content disclaimer
I
that, like,
do. Yeah.
hey, this book is going to be subversive and
Mhm.
transgressive, and also it's going to have themes of X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that's kind of witchcraft.
It
So
is.
I appreciate the disclaimer. And I think that people do need that. There's a website called Does the Dog Die at the End? Because people
Yeah.
want to know if in a movie or a TV show, if there's going to be triggering content.
Yeah.
But I also, me personally, would invite readers to just explore it as it is, because like witchcraft, in my view, is inherently already so political and subversive and transgressive. So,
Absolutely. And one of the big things that's always inspired me is the historic myths of many cultures that came before us. And the thing is when you read those myths and try to hold them up to society of today, um, they don't always check, if you know what I mean. Like their brothers,
yeah,
sisters, their
yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah. Or
that's
even in
the
just
way
like
it was written.
folkloric sort of like witchcraft. Like if we
Yeah.
look at the Gael Bal Hakim or the Picatrix, is like slitting a donkey's throat and taking its blood legal or accessible
Yeah. I don't
in
know
today's world?
where
Probably
do you
not.
get a lion's pelt nowadays?
Right. Is boiling a cat alive and drowning it in a river and cleaning its bones accessible or legal? Maybe we should look at that from like a folkloric sort of sense
An
as opposed
inspired
to like
story.
literal.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things about fictional stories is that they do have the power to inspire us and move us in our craft, um, whether that be through myth, historical myth, whether that be through new stories that are coming into existence. I do feel like there is a way in which we can be inspired by these. They can move us, they can help us how we navigate into our faith, our beliefs, how we see spirit, how we relate to animism. The
Mhm.
story itself is actually a story about plants, which
Yeah.
which people don't realize right away. But the whole point is that these brothers end up sacrificing themselves for her,
Mhm.
and they become two major, huge plant sources that are part of her magic: dragon's blood and madder root. And so we see the way these two things come together in working with ink, dyeing cloth, using them in charms, burning a huge part of the only incense you will see in this entire book is dragon's blood. It is an ode to the Red Mother. It's a sacrifice made for the Red Mother. It's an offering to the Red Mother's spirit and to the spirits of the old ones.
Do you want to talk about fiction and witchcraft?
Sure, I don't mind at all. here's the thing about fiction. Fiction is an extremely, how can I put this? It's a very multifaceted word. One person's fiction is another person's gospel. And I mean that literally. One person's inspired story is another person's deeply religious faith. I do think that we can approach aspects of fiction and, like I said, take from them how they inspire us. We can write new stories that we are inspired by older stories. My favorite thing in the world. I love. Oh, this is so silly. I love the movie Gretel and Hansel. It's an inspired retelling of Hansel and Gretel, but it's from Gretel's perspective. And this witch, yeah, she eats children, but she's not actually setting out to eat Gretel. She's actually setting out to teach her to become a witch herself. And I think the way that fiction throughout history has inspired belief in things, has inspired different faiths, has been someone's literal text, religious text, or has been someone else's condemnation. It's very multifaceted. It exists across the plane. There's absolutely a huge difference between myth and folklore and fiction, maybe. The thing is because fiction is so multifaceted, it really changes from person's perspective to perspective. And I think one of the big things that stands out to me in all of this is if that is something that speaks to you, I encourage you to try and follow it more. I encourage you to dive into your own gnosis. I encourage you to be inspired by pop culture. I encourage you to experiment with it, to see where it takes you. I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's something that if more people were open to it, they would see what other possibilities exist out there in the world of witchcraft and the world of the occult.
Are you familiar with like the whole concept of hadiths?
I've heard of it. Can you
So
break
basically it's kind of taking, canon, holy book, gnosis, but like this is blasphemous to say, but this is the Red Mother stream. Hadiths are basically taking holy book gnosis, but like reinterpreting that into a hadith. So like a personal understanding of holy gnosis. And I kind of feel like cunning words, but also the Red Mother could be seen as a hadith in the sense that it's pulling upon, older trad witch threads, be it by Gemma Gary or Agrippa, XYZ of your inspiration. But these are still valuable witch hadiths that is a modern reinterpretation of elements and themes that are older than both of us,
Absolutely. I mean, well, look at Robert Cochrane's Clan of Tubal Cain.
Yeah.
This is a direct pulling on the threads of early biblical stories. He was prolific in what he created that eventually became thought of and known as the word traditional witchcraft.
Right.
These stories came from centuries before, but he created something new with it. And I like to think that I've done something new with some forms of traditional witchcraft.
Oh, honey, you have.
Yeah.
Not like to think. You have.
Thank you.
You absolutely have. And who is to say, like, in another 50 years or 100 years, I think about, are witches of the future going to have access to, like, our podcasts here on YouTube or like our self-published books on Amazon? Are they going to be around in 50 years? I hope so.
I hope so.
I think it would be so cool to see like Doreen Valiente talking with Robert Cochrane or Gerald Gardner on a YouTube podcast. Like that would be so sickening.
Well, it reminds me of like when we find older scrolls and we read them. And the thing is like we are archaeologists now are and have for the past, century discovered all of these old things in digs and archaeological sites, and it gives us information about life at the time. The thing is our technology nowadays, like social media is exactly that, but it's online. These are
Right.
things that are going to be preserved,
For better or
possibly for
worse.
better or for worse, for centuries to come. And it's funny because there are social media is rife with infighting. And what I think is so funny is when you look back at like uh, uh, Robert Cochrane and
Gerald Gardner,
Gerald
their whole
Gardner,
battles between each other.
battles between each other, Gerald
Yes.
Gardner and Cecil Williamson, uh, uh, Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente. I mean, like, we know that there are documented disagreements and fights and witch battles between them. The thing is they were done in the form of letters, or they were documented in the form of stories that we wrote in some that were written in some of their books, some of their letters, some of
Right. And now they're on
behind.
Facebook
Now they're
or
on Facebook
Threads or Instagram
or
or
or Twitter. Like
yeah.
it's one of those things where they're still happening, and these will be documented for 100 years from now.
Oh, I
Um,
hope so.
Absolutely.
I hope so.
I think that's kind of hilarious in a way, that it's still happening exactly the same way. Like we think all these
Because
prolific
nothing changes.
nothing changes. All these prolific contributors to modern witchcraft did not all get along. God, look at Aleister Crowley. He had a slew of haters, and for some of them, rightfully so.
Right. Like, we have not in the past all sung Kumbaya, nor do I think should we. Like, I think that's kind of antithetical to like the
Yeah.
spirit of witchcraft. Um, I want to just say while we're still streaming that if anyone has any questions that you would like to ask Marshall, please comment them down below and we will try to get to them. If you have questions in general, I would say for Marshall or about the Red Mother specifically. So I want to ask you, in the meantime, Marshall, what can we expect to see next that you can announce to like the public?
There's definitely something that I'm hoping will be published this year, and it is going to be somewhat, like I said, it's going to be somewhat separate from the Cunning Words collection. Um, it's interesting. The longer I've been on social media, the less chained I feel to chasing the algorithm. And that's very, very freeing. But in the same breath, it also feels like the only reason that I am privileged enough to self-publish is because of the following I've garnered on social media. So some of the things that are coming up are like I said, it's a new book that I've been working on. I'm really hesitant to say what it's about yet because if I am going to go in the direction of traditional publishing, I really want to figure out how that's going to go before I start talking about it too publicly.
Oh,
Um,
that's fair.
yeah, the podcast has been really, really fun this year. Me and Austin have put together some great episodes. We've been doing a whole series on Paracelsus and the elementals, which is really fun.
Shout
Um,
out to Austin.
yeah, shout out to Austin, Banex Bramble. Check him out. Uh, let's see. I am going to Salem Witch Fest in August, so I'm really looking forward to that. We always do an episode afterward talking about it, so that's going to be a great way to share our experience. So if you are interested in possibly going to Salem Witch Fest this year, you can check out last year's episode. It came out, I want to say, in September of 2024, and we'll have another one that comes out this year. But I'm definitely in the wings, working on some new writing, and then honestly, tattooing my body up. That's one of the big things. I'm getting more inked. I'm putting a lot of my own personal gnosis on my body. It feels very sacred temple to me.
Love. Because, tattoos are only for felons and whores,
That's
obviously.
right.
So where can people find you if they don't already know? Like, I'm going to put your links down below, but
You can find me at on Threads, on Instagram, on TikTok at Witch of Southern Light, all one word. I do have my email on there. I have a Patreon. I have my art on my Redbubble shop in my link in my bio. I
Oh, I
have
gotta check that out myself.
yeah, thank you. I have
Yeah.
and Redbubble is super cute. If you first pull it up, it's like makes you think everything is a sticker. It's not. You can get it printed on anything. There's a whole slew of stuff you can get it printed on: t-shirts, mugs, journals. And that's actually really fun because I have some journals that aren't around here right now that I printed some of my own artwork on, and I just like to take notes in them. And I have grimoire pages on my Etsy shop. They're very inexpensive. There you can download them as a PDF. You can cut them out. You can put them in your own personal grimoire. I'm a very big cut and paste grimoire
Oh, I
person.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. Yeah, my grimoire is basically a scrapbook for
Yes,
sure.
it's absolutely a scrapbook of, and it's like the binding is falling apart, and the pages are like this wide on this side, and it's wild. I love it.
Do you have any advice for anyone who might be looking to self-publish books of their own?
Mhm. Well, I do Amazon KDP. It has been the most helpful. It does have a lot of guidelines and parameters, and when you actually go to Amazon KDP to publish it, it gives you a lot of direction on how to go about it. Um, it's not very expensive. I even saw someone say up there in the chat that they always buy self-published, thank you, Tradcaf books as soon as they come out because historically they go out of print very fast. What's great about KDP is they're print to order. There's no warehouse with a bunch of books sitting there selling out. As soon as you order it, KDP prints it and mails it to you. So technically, this could go on being printed for long after I'm gone. I just have to make sure I will it to someone to keep the account going. But the whole point is that I want it to never be limited. I want as many as possible to go out around the world to whoever wants them. And I would definitely recommend finding a place that you feel really comfortable writing. Um, I cannot write at a computer. I actually write on the elliptical at the gym on my in the notes app of my phone. It's very just I have like a whole organization in the notes app of how like a title folder for Red Mother and then subfolders underneath it with all the stories and pictures that I've put together. Um, Finding a way to write that makes you feel comfortable doesn't have to be the sitting at a computer at a coffee shop, sitting at your desk.
Yeah.
You can really find very different places. And the reason I like to write on the elliptical is because that constant repetitive motion, it's very I feel like I fall into a trance-like state.
Yeah, I was gonna say like an active meditation
It is
or
an active
trance
meditation,
inducing.
and I get really in this flow space. It's crazy. I love it.
Also, like the elliptical is nice on our knees
It
because
is.
I do not have knees like Megan at my age. No.
No, yeah, I'm 38 now, so I've had some historical onset early arthritis in my knees. There was a while where I was doing a couple things that I was like, this is not helping, Marshall.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. And it was really nice talking to you about the Red Mother. Again, I appreciate you being patient. I know that we both have had some scheduling issues. I posted about this on Instagram, but I am my grandmother's like primary caretaker. And
Yeah,
like, it was crazy. She's doing much better now. She's home, she's stable, but she did have a stroke. And then
I'm
we
sorry.
both had some fur baby issues, and just Mondays aren't the vibe, apparently.
Apparently not. Who likes
Apparently.
Mondays anyways?
Um, but yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I think we're going to wrap this up. I look forward to hopefully reviewing your books in the future and having you on to like kiki about them like
Would love
this
to.
again. And yeah, until next time, thank you everyone in the chat for joining. And until next time, blessed be, and we will see you in hell.